The humble Toyota Corolla, a mainstay on Australian roads for decades. It's perfect first car fare, the ideal city commuter, and in recent years, an economical hybrid. But it's fair to say the industry has changed quite a bit since the Corolla made its local debut in the late 1960s. So, has this little legend kept up with the times? Keep watching to find out if this is still the ideal hatchback and to see whether I can fit myself in its notoriously tiny boot. The Corolla I'm testing today is the SX Hybrid, so that sits one level above the base grade and it's priced from $34,280 before on-road costs. Over and above the base grade, it adds things like dual zone climate control, keyless entry and keyless start, and a wireless smartphone charger. Plus, this sunstone orange metallic paint adds $575 to the purchase price. If you want this car as a sedan, there's actually no difference in price, so that's good to know. Now, the Corolla is actually one of the few cars left in Australia with a starting price below that $30,000 mark, and it's joined by some of its rivals like the Kia Cerato, the Hyundai i30 and the Mazda 3. All of those cars are slightly cheaper than the Corolla, but it is worth noting that the Corolla is one of the few compact cars available with a full hybrid powertrain. Plus, I'll talk on this a bit more later, but it has quite a bit lower ownership costs. The hybrid powertrain combines a 1.8 litre four-cylinder petrol engine with an electric motor, which together send a combined 103 kilowatts and 142 newton meters to the front wheels via a continuously variable automatic transmission. For those comparing the hybrid with the full petrol Corolla, it's worth noting the hybrid does offer less power and torque than the full petrol Corolla with its larger 2-litre engine. I've gotten myself a comfy seat out of the sun and I've got my trusty clipboard with me because I would like to talk about fuel economy and ownership costs, not only because it's really important for this segment, but because I think it's a particular strong suit of the Corolla Hybrid. So, the claimed fuel consumption in this hybrid Corolla is 4 litres per 100 kilometres on a combined cycle. That's according to Toyota. The highest I have seen so far in my week of driving is 5 litres per 100 kilometres. So even that is really economical. And I reckon if you're driving on a fairly regular driving loop, combined cycle of freeway and urban driving, you're likely to see fuel economy readings of between 4 and 5 litres and no higher than 5, which is pretty damn great. On that note, what is the lowest fuel economy you've ever seen in a car? Please let me know in the comments because A, it's good for my research, and B, I'm very competitive and I would like to beat it. Now, if you're weighing up the hybrid and the full petrol Corolla, you'll notice that the hybrid costs around $2,500 more than the full petrol version in the same grade. And the petrol version of this claims 6 litres per 100 kilometres on a combined cycle of fuel use. Now, if you base your workings or your maths on Toyota's fuel consumption claims for both the hybrid and the full petrol, the hybrid could possibly save you roughly 4 tanks of fuel per 10,000 kilometres you drive. So you should make back that extra spend over the course of 4 to 5 years roughly. So that's something to weigh up if you're really kind of noticing the price difference. Is that sure, it might cost you a little bit more in the short term, but in the long term you're likely to make that money back. Toyota's warranty is 5 years with no limit on kilometres travelled, but they'll add an extra 2 years of coverage for the hybrid system and driveline if you keep your car maintained in accordance with the servicing logbook and warranty as well. Now, servicing your car isn't going to cost you too much either, and that's another highlight of the Toyota models in general, but particularly of this car. They've capped the cost of servicing at just $245 per visit over 5 years. So that's $1,225 in total, which is actually less than it costs to insure the car for 1 year, according to the quote that I got. And for added comparison, Kia charges over the same 5-year period, $2,022 to service the Cerato. So this is really, really cheap to service. Now, maths is not my strong suit, but I've got to say, even I can figure out that all of the above adds up to a pretty affordable ownership experience. As you can see, the cabin of the Corolla isn't particularly luxurious, particularly in this grey, but I will say, importantly, all the touch points feel nice. So this steering wheel and gear knob are finished in a fake premium leather, I think it's called, and it feels really smooth and lovely to the touch and just adds to the overall driver experience. Plus, you've got some really nice modern conveniences, including dual zone climate control, which is always appreciated, and it's managed out of this very neat, compact strip of buttons and dials just below the infotainment screen. You've got a couple of air vents here and a couple on either side as well. You've also got a wireless smartphone charger, which works really well. I will say, however, it's not particularly indented and there's no sort of rubber grip tray to keep your phone from slipping out. So on a few occasions, I've sort of done a turn and my phone's gone flying out of there. So that's one small critique. I also don't particularly love these seats. We obviously don't have any heating function and they're only manually adjustable. There's no electric adjustment. Maybe I've been spoiled by electric adjustment, but I did find it took me a lot longer and a lot more fiddling to get my driving position right. They're also not particularly comfortable. I don't love the fabric finish. It's a little bit rough. It's not terrible, it's just not particularly soft or anything like that. There's bolstering on the side, which isn't too narrow, so for bigger drivers, I don't think they'll feel too cramped, but yeah, I feel like they could have maybe done more with these seats, made them a little bit more comfortable or exciting. Storage-wise, there is not a heap, but there is enough. You've got some door bins either side. They've got little segments, so there's a spot sort of for a small drink bottle and then a spot for your knickknacks. There's a center console storage bin as well. It is not huge, it's not very deep, not very wide, but it does have a USB-C port and a 120 watt or 12 volt outlet. You've also got a USB-C port hidden away under the dash as well for charging your phone if someone else has stolen your wireless smartphone charger, and two cup holders here in the center console. I have used them to store my essentials, which is my water bottle and my packet of jelly beans, the all black kind, which is the superior flavor. I don't want to hear otherwise. If you agree, like this video. If you disagree, look, you can attempt to justify your insane stance in the comment section and maybe I will respond, but you're crazy. Infotainment in the Toyota Corolla is managed out of this 8-inch touchscreen here. It's not particularly big and the graphics are not particularly inspiring. The menu options are pretty basic, but I will say it's all very functional and it's easy to use and very straightforward, so you just get in and go. There's no complex, manuals to read or anything like that. This offers DAB digital radio, AM and FM radio, the usual, but it also has wireless Apple CarPlay, which is great, but unfortunately Android Auto requires a wired connection, and on this grade you get inbuilt satellite navigation as well. Another cool thing about all new Toyotas now is that you get a 1-year subscription complimentary to Toyota Connected Services, and that enables you to connect your car via the Toyota app. So I'll show you a little bit more about that in a second. So I've got the My Toyota app here, and as you can see, it's got a nice little picture of my car on there, Susanna's Corolla Hybrid. Fortunately, I don't own this for real, so some of the vehicle details aren't available to me because you have to verify your ownership, but theoretically, you're able to access your car remotely and see the fuel level, see its location as well. If your car's stolen, you can track it. You can also see when it's next due for a service and access its service history online and see if there's any active recalls as well. So it's just a nice way to connect to your car remotely and store all of your important details digitally, because as we know, service logbooks are great in theory, but they do tend to go missing or get ruined, and we're a digital society now, so it's good to have that all in your phone. Finally, connected services means that you can place a call to emergency services if you should need to do so via this button up here, which is the SOS button. So it's just an extra peace of mind factor. A lot of cars are offering this technology now with remote access and emergency calls from the car, and it's a little bit of an update to the Toyota system, and you get 1 year free, so that's a bonus. You can give it a go and see if you want to re-up for the following years. This isn't a huge back seat. I've found that in the week I've had with this car, it's been particularly annoying getting in and out, because I've sometimes had to sort of be back here to get my son settled into his child seat, but also getting him in and out of the back seat has been really tricky. And I know that this isn't a family car, but if for some reason you do have to accommodate kids in this car and child seats, I'll speak a little bit about that. But just in general for adults, the doors don't open particularly wide. So, and it's also a low car, the roof line's extra low in the back seat here, so it just does feel like you really have to contort yourself to get into the back seat. Now that I'm back here, it's not god awful for headroom. It's certainly going to be a little bit limiting for taller occupants. I'm 178 centimeters tall, so you can kind of get a sense of the fact that I've got room to play with, but not heaps. Knee room's not bad with the driver's seat in my regular position, but I do tend to sit a little bit forward. So if you're someone with long legs who really likes to stretch out, you won't be leaving your back seat occupants with much room. There are also no air vents back here, no USB ports to charge your phone. There's no really kind of exciting comfort factors, so that's worth keeping in mind for longer drives. It maybe is a little bit less comfortable. You only get one mat pocket on the back of that seat. There's no mat pocket here, and in terms of storage, it's pretty limited. There's a cup holder in the door and a really tiny storage tray as well. You've also got a drop-down armrest with 2 cup holders. There are ISOFIX tether points on each of the outboard seats and 3 top tether points over the back of this bench here. As you can see, I've got my child seat in here. It actually fits not terribly. If I have to move over to this seat here, I'm feeling pretty cramped. So I would say that if you've got a child seat back here, which most people won't do, you won't have a lot of room to play with. The Corolla received 5 stars from ANCAP when it was tested in 2018, which was before a few major criteria changes took effect. That safety rating expires at the end of next year. As standard, all Corolla grades get a reverse camera, active cruise control with lane trace assist, autonomous emergency braking with pedestrian and cyclist detection, blind spot monitoring, lane departure alerts, auto high beam and speed sign recognition. The SX grade adds blind spot monitoring, front and rear parking sensors and a rear cross traffic alert. I am back at the boot of the Toyota Corolla and I will open it up to reveal, ta-da! It's tiny. So there's 217 litres of cargo space back here. For reference, that's half the size of the Kia Cerato's boot, and even the Mazda 3 I think has closer to 300 litres. So there's not much to play with back here, but to be fair, it's a small car, so that kind of makes sense. There is, however, under the floor a temporary spare wheel, so that's something. And if you need access to that temporary spare wheel, there's a clever little mechanism here where there's a lever on the boot floor. You can lift it up, hook it onto this orange cord here at the base of the cargo cover, and that'll just mean you can access your spare wheel unencumbered. Very handy. Now if I take this down, there's not much else to look at. There are 2 deeper side storage compartments on either side of the boot for things that might rattle around, so that's useful. There is this hard plastic removable cargo cover, but the thing is, if you do remove it, you'll have to take it fully out of the car because there's nowhere natural to store it in here. It's very, very big, so you'll have to find room for it in your house. Not ideal. Now I happen to think that, look, 217 litres. Litres are a good enough measurement of cargo space, but do any of us really know what that means? So I think a better unit of measurement, in my humble opinion, is Susanna's. So I'm going to see if I can fit myself in this boot. Now, bear with me because this will not be the most graceful thing I've ever done. And I do have some onlookers here today who probably think I'm insane, and that's fine. This is the stuff I do for YouTube, but I'm going to put my feet in the side compartments here. Yep. Okay. All right. Whew. It's tight. Dangerously close to the cargo cover. Okay, now I think the real test is, for my cameraman, if you could just come and close this for me. Thank you. Thanks, Frank. All right.
And for my final trick. Making Susanna.
Okay, open it up. This is hell. Get me out. Frank? I'm not kidding. Frank! Frank!
Okay. While I'll be back.
Oh God, I'm never doing that again. You took way too long to open that.
I was on purpose.
I quit. All right, so I'm pulling out of my car space to head for a drive in the Corolla Hybrid. And I will say, one of the things that I don't particularly love on this car is the reverse camera. So it's just a little bit basic, and I've driven a bunch of cars recently that are really upping the game in the reverse camera world. So that means an overhead view monitor or just a really crisp view with lots of different options in terms of what you can see and what angles you can see. This is just very basic. It does the job. It's a reverse camera. It's got some dynamic lines, but it's not going over and above. So that's something where maybe there's a little bit of room for improvement, but again, it's not really a black mark against the Corolla's name. It's just something that would make it even more special if there was something a bit snazzier on offer. So this is a city car, which means it does its best work, in my opinion, at city speeds. And because the hybrid system allows it to operate as an electric car pretty much from speeds of sort of 0 to 40 kilometers an hour, it's incredibly smooth, silent and linear from a standstill and in stop-start traffic, which makes city driving really pleasurable. And if you're anything like me, you'll actually sort of adjust your driving style accordingly to try and keep it on that EV mode for as long as possible. It does tend to tap out when you, really hit that throttle, or if you kind of head up of speeds over 30 kilometers an hour or more. But there's a little display in the driver display that shows you whether you're sort of in eco mode or power mode. And I know myself and a couple of my colleagues, we really get a lot of joy out of trying to keep it in that eco range rather than power mode. So you'll find yourself getting a little bit addictive to that economical driving style. When you do get up to speed, it can be a little bit jarring when that engine kicks in, because it does sort of feel like it's revving quite high and quite loudly. I do think it's unfair to criticize that, because you've got that quite distinct comparison from the very quiet electric drive mode up to the sound of the engine noise, which means it's sort of a bit more pronounced than it might be just in a regular petrol car. So I don't want to penalize the Corolla for that, but it can sound a little bit, I don't know, unsatisfactory when you're maybe putting your foot down to merge into the freeway. Having said that, I actually was quite surprised by the power reserve in the Corolla. I did find that if I was, having to get out in front of a big truck bearing down on me or pull out into a lane with oncoming traffic, and I sort of had a small window to get onto the road, it did the job quite nicely. So whilst the outputs aren't particularly high on paper, because it's a small car, they sort of make sense and it never feels wanting for power. So that's something to keep in mind. One thing the Corolla's really taught me so far in my week of driving is just how accustomed I've grown to SUVs. So I did find it quite a bit of an adjustment coming from my regular car and a few of the other larger SUVs I've driven recently into this car. One of the things I found a little bit unusual was the fact that the roofline does feel quite low. I'm fairly tall and does feel like it's sort of encroaching on my forward field of vision. However, rear visibility is pretty good for a small hatchback. The only other thing I will say is that the pillars do feel a bit thicker and more close together than they would in an SUV, which tends to have a larger glass house. And so I did find I actually had some proper blind spots that I don't really have to worry about as much in SUVs. So the fact that this has blind spot monitoring and lane departure alerts and things like that, you will actually find you rely on them a little bit more than you might in a larger car. Something I did love as well in the Corolla is the fact that the ride is really supple. So I kind of assumed, probably stupidly, that being in a car of this size where you're a little bit lower to the ground than an SUV, that I'd really have to adjust my driving style, really slow down over speed bumps and be really cautious tackling any road irregularities. But this car actually does a fantastic job of cushioning you from any blows up into the cabin. It feels very level. It doesn't kind of come easily off kilter when you're going over uneven road surfaces. It sort of maintains its balance really nicely, and I have never once actually gone over any kind of bump where I felt any sense of jarring edge up through the cabin. So I think they've done a really nice job of tuning this suspension perfectly for the size of the car and the kinds of imperfect city roads that you'll be tackling on the reg. One complaint, and I'm aware that some of my complaints are very related to the screens in the car, which obviously are small. This is a small car, but I don't love the reverse camera. I feel like it could be improved upon to make this even more wonderful to drive. But the other complaint I have is that this driver's display in front of me, it's got all the info you need. It's just how it's presented is a little bit small, and I do find that I'm searching sometimes and sort of taking my eyes off the road to find out key info. So for example, I couldn't tell earlier Sorry, just got to check all my blind spots. As I mentioned in this car, there's quite a few. I really feel like I was searching the drive display to see what speed my cruise control was set to, because it's a really tiny number. There is a digital speedo. It's not massive, but that's fairly easy to see. The live speed limit info too, the traffic sign recognition, is sort of up to the top left. So depending on sort of how upright you're sitting, that can be a little bit hidden behind the steering wheel as well. I'm sure with a bit more time I'd get used to really zeroing in on where everything is, but I wish that they'd bumped up the font size even on some of these things, because when you're, maneuvering quickly and you're on freeways in traffic and things like that, you don't want to be hunting for that kind of info. You want it to be really readily available. So there are a couple of drive modes to be aware of in this car. I've already mentioned EV mode, which just keeps the car in electric power for as long as possible, but it will tap out with certain levels of pedal input and over certain speeds, which tends to be sort of over the 35 to 40 kilometre an hour mark. But it is really good for city driving and stop-start traffic. Another drive mode that's good for stop-start traffic is B mode. So it's actually down here on the gear stick. You've got your regular gears, but you've also got a B gear, and that can be a little bit weird or confusing if you've not driven a hybrid car before. Essentially what it is it increases the regenerative braking of the car, which essentially turns the electric motor into a generator and uses the drag created by that to slow the car instead of the friction brakes, which in turn prolongs your battery state of charge for a little bit longer. So it basically just means that your battery is going to keep its state of charge, which is fantastic for electric driving, and you won't really notice the difference. It's not like an electric car with one pedal drive where it dramatically slows the car down or anything like that. You might notice on sort of hills or things like that when you decelerate, you slow a little bit faster than you might if you were decelerating without that mode engaged, but it's really quite imperceptible, and it's just a good way to up your battery charge while you're in stop-start traffic. There's also power mode, which is kind of like sport mode but slightly less exciting, although I will say that it does really sharpen the accelerator response. So I just put my foot down. I really jumped forward, so I don't know, it just provides a little bit more fun factor maybe in freeway driving, but I've been sticking mostly to eco mode because the big benefit of a hybrid is fuel economy, and I want to be as economical as possible. Finally, you really won't be wanting for much in terms of driver assistance and safety on this car. It's a really well-equipped safety package as standard, and I found the systems work really well. One of the things I did like was that the active cruise with distance control is kind of measured in its response, so it's effective. But in other cars, if someone pulls in front of you, it really slams the brakes on it and can be quite jarring. This car is, it does the job, it gets you there, but it's not overly dramatic in the way it kind of takes over, and it's not jarring or anything like that. So I think it's done a really nice job. I do find the sensors go from kind of beep beep to beep very quickly, so I've just had to get my head around the level of sensitivity there, and I do find sometimes they hinder more than help, but they're still a really nice to have feature. And as mentioned, the reverse camera does the job quite nicely, and I still remember the days in my Nissan Tiida of having no sensors, no reverse camera, and purely head checks, so really I can't complain. Everything's an improvement. In all, the supple ride, the mostly silent powertrain, and the sort of light, agile steering give the Corolla this actual sense of sleekness on the road, particularly at city speeds, which is really enjoyable. It's peaceful, it's very comfortable, and I feel like I'm sort of slinking around corners and zipping in and out of side streets with ease, which is really nice. It's sort of a big win to drive a small car that feels nimble and quick and agile, rather than a big cumbersome SUV. It's quite refreshing.
For shoppers looking for a reliable, affordable and efficient city car, I'd struggle to not recommend the Toyota Corolla. However, be warned, this is a proper compact car, so there's not much boot space or backseat space to play with. And if you think your needs might change, then it's possible other cars in this class will offer a little bit more cabin flexibility. Still, this is really nice and affordable to run. It's lovely to drive, and it's got a solid level of safety and infotainment equipment for your spend. It appears that after all of these years, Toyota is still on a Corolla. Sorry, I had to. If you enjoyed this review but you like to go a little bit faster, Keep watching to see Josh tear up the track in the GR Corolla. And if you'd like to see me trying to fit myself in the boot of other cars, then you should subscribe to our YouTube channel.